Welcome to the podcast, Michelle. I am so excited to have you here and thank you for taking your time. I feel like this is a long time coming for us to chat.
Yes, I know. It's been we've known each other for over a year,
Yeah.
maybe. So yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for
Yeah.
having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Michelle is a cross cultural wedding planner, and she's based in California. And I invited her to chat about what couples are struggling with these days since the coronavirus outbreak. And I collected some questions for her. So, we're just going to dive right into it. So, can you maybe just talk a little bit about what how did that happen that you became a cross-cultural wedding planner? I know that's not a common niche in wedding planning industry, I would say, but obviously I love it and I am always so excited to hear different cultural traditions. So how did you end up doing what you're doing now?
So, I went to school as a political science major and took a pre-law track. So, because I thought I was going to be a lawyer. And so with that, I went to go intern in Washington, D.C. And I was working for a lobbying firm. So, like, rallying support on Capitol Hill. And I thought that that's what I wanted to do, go like to do policy change and to save the world.
Mm.
And then when I was interning, they put me on an events committee to where I was like organizing large gatherings. We had to like rally support for certain legislation that was happening, and we had to like bring people in large transportations from like Georgia and like all these different states, and it just became this huge, massive like event planning role that I was supporting one of the team members in the lobbying firm that I was working for. And so then from there, I was like, "Oh, I really love this." And when I came back from Washington D.C. and I graduated, I joined a medical university that they had an events planner position available, and I applied and I got the job. And then it just kind of was history from there. And I fell in love with weddings because we were doing like galas and we had a venue. So we were doing weddings and we had um, we had marathons and all kinds of stuff that we were doing with the marketing team. And so that was a lot of fun for me. And I was naturally just able to like organize and compartmentalize. It was just all the things that I love to do. I got to do them. And then when I started doing weddings more in the medical university, I was like, oh, I really love this. It's so much different than corporate, because in corporate they give you a big chunk of money and they're like, this is what we want, go do it. But with couples, it's very personal, and it's very, the wedding is very sacred. So it's not just, we're not just, throwing a party, although we are, but also there's more to it. And then families are involved. And then the whole cross-cultural piece came into play because a few years back, I was working with a couple that they, they identified as American, like full blown, but they were raised in a different in like a culture that they honored, and they really respected that their parents were from.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted to incorporate that into their wedding, but they couldn't see it. Like if you look at all the mainstream, like Martha Stewart and Style Me Pretty, if you look at all that, you don't necessarily see culture in there. I think it's starting to become a topic, but 2 years ago when 2 or 3 years ago, actually, because we planned their wedding, this that wasn't a thing. And so when I was encouraging them to like be like, no, yes, you should totally have two ceremonies in one day. That's totally okay. Or it's totally okay to have to bring in an officiant from a different culture and then have a translator. They couldn't see it because it wasn't done before. And that really broke my heart because it's such a like this particular couple. This was a Korean couple, and they were trying to incorporate pebek into their ceremony, and it's such a beautiful ceremony, and they didn't get to share it because they were just like, you know what, Michelle, it's just too stressful. I don't want to,
Mm-hmm.
deal with that. And anyway, it broke my heart, and I kind of saw that through and throughout the like years. So finally, I decided to make that a goal of mine, is to help them understand. And so once I was able to get some couples and convince them that, it was okay to do that, they didn't have to be worried, we can cut out other things to make it work, then I really wanted to start honing in on that clientele, because I think there's just so much that we need to share, and culture is so beautiful, and it's okay that it doesn't look like everybody else's wedding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And were you like a little bit, because my first thing came in my mind, do you have any cultural history yourself or any relationship that you have? Or how did that come of you making sure that you're familiar with different cultural traditions? Like, I'm assuming it requires a lot of research and things like that.
Oh yeah, it sure does. And especially because like sometimes it could be actually most of the time it's like cultures that have never fused. So then I
Yeah.
have to research and learn new things. So it's always learning. But it started so going back to my undergrad, the when I said I studied political science, comparative politics and international relations was my focus. So my interest in countries and regions and different cultures has always kind of been in my background. It's just always been so fascinating. And then it kind of just started happening organically with, because I'm, so in addition to being a cross-cultural wedding planner, I consider myself a modern wedding planner. And so
Hmm.
I'm working with my couples that are identified, like they're kind of like me. I'm first generation here, and while I appreciate my parents' culture, it's not something I 100% live out every day, especially not the religious pieces. Some of it I do, but I pick and choose what I what I want, to incorporate into my lifestyle and what I believe in.
What
And
are
I think
your
that's
parents' culture?
my mom. My both my parents are from Guatemala,
Okay.
and then when I married my husband, he's Mexican, and it was really hard to although we share borders, it was so hard to combine our cultures because they come from a huge family, and his mother-in-law had a even the fact that I didn't change my last name, it was a big issue for the family because for them it's a lot of pride, and they're like, you're coming into the family. Anyway, it was the whole thing. So
Hmm.
I faced that issue. And also my family's very small. There's like five of us total, and then maybe some extended family here and there. Um, but they don't live here. And so we've just always kind of grown up very like in a small family situation, and they have like millions of cousins everywhere. And so when we had to plan the wedding and they wanted to invite everybody. I was
Yeah.
like, I was thinking like 25 people, but okay. I mean, so it was a really weird dynamic. But even before that, before I even got into this, just studying different cultures, trying to understand different political like landscapes for different countries, that was always a big draw for me. And then I think it just kind of happened organically where my modern couples were coming to me, and then I was trying to help them. And then I really pursued that once I realized that there was a gap in the industry.
I feel like that's like a perfect mix for you. You found your perfect place because, once you're familiar with the countries and cultures and languages and just nationalities, it might be easier. And then all you have to do after that is just specifically look into like wedding traditions. Yeah, that's,
Right. Yes.
yeah, yep, yep.
Yeah. Well, it's not for everyone, I would say, because I do have
Mm-hmm.
planners who tell me, Michelle, do you take, and then they'll like whatever culture it is, do you take this type of wedding? I'm like, yeah, but for them, it's more like, oh, I don't really, I don't know how to do it, and it's uncomfortable for people to go outside of their what they normally know, and for me it's more of like challenging, and it's fun for me to figure out creative ways to make sure that we're representing everyone's vision in the wedding.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned that you've been busy replanning some weddings now because the coronavirus just made all the weddings stop and pause, and some couples are considering doing in-house weddings. Some of them are trying to decide if they should postpone it or just what should they do. So what has been like questions that would come back to you that couples would ask from you?
So yeah, it's been kind of crazy to say the least. I do feel very happy that I get to still work, but it's been I could have never seen this coming. And even though I'm familiar with cancellations, because I mean, wedding cancellations have always happened and postponements have
Mm-hmm.
always happened. Rescheduling has always been a thing. But this is weird because we don't know what the future holds. So we were affected by this back in at the beginning of March. My clients and I, we were concerned about what was happening because my bride was getting married on March 14th, which was our first wedding of the season. And so we were really concerned at the end of February because she's a healthcare worker. And so they were kind of monitoring the situation because she was familiar with that world a little bit more than I was. And then I kept planning ahead because I was like, you know what, regardless, in like 3 weeks, we need to be ready to go. So I kept moving forward. And then they really started to take the conversation seriously because that was the weekend that it all kind of just like became really dramatic. That weekend of March 14th. That was probably the last time that I think that was the weekend that they started implementing restrictions for
Mm-hmm.
the people. So anyway, on that Thursday before March 14th, she called me and she was like, Michelle, we've decided that we aren't going to have our wedding anymore. And so then that kind of snowballed and got me into fast tracking and to think about the rest of my clients that were coming up and exit plans and postponing plans. And we just started getting to work with all my clients. We scheduled meetings and we talked about the reality of what it would look like. For the most part, we have been planning ahead until we're told that we can't. Like the excitement continues with my clients. So I even though it's a scary time, we're still really excited. Like I
Mm-hmm.
know that we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but we're also not going to stop plans because
Yeah.
the ban could be lifted in May. And even though gatherings aren't so much allowed,
Mm-hmm.
we could start slowly lifting the bans for like 5 people and 10
Mm-hmm.
people. And then,
Mm-hmm.
and life will go on. All my fall weddings are continuing full force. And I think also like having consistent conversations with them, like keeping my clients on, like in the know of like, okay, you know what, we're moving forward. And if not, I reassure them that if we need to postpone, like plan B is in place already. We'll just, it'll give you more time to save money. It'll give you more time. It'll give more time for people to feel comfortable going to gatherings again. So, if anything, there's always some light at the end of the tunnel. But mostly the questions I'm getting from my clients is, should I postpone? Should I cancel? Like, what should I do? And then it's followed by, okay, if I do postpone, when should I postpone to?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in my response, normally it's like I said, we're going to keep moving forward until we're told that we can't. So like right now, for example, I'm working with a client and her wedding is supposed to happen on June 6th,
Mm-hmm.
but that's so close. And it's a Persian Lebanese wedding and their weddings are big weddings. They're big productions. And so we in our hearts know that the idea of having, 300, 400 people attend the wedding is probably not going to happen, especially if there's older people, especially if there's people traveling. It's
Mm-hmm.
most likely not going to happen. But a few weeks back, we talked to all the vendors and we talked about what would happen if they decided to cancel. So we like referred to contracts. Some vendors were willing to return the deposit because they had the money, but a lot of them they don't have the money. I mean, everyone since they're being canceled, some people aren't getting paid, and even though there are stimulus packages in place from the government, those haven't quite kicked in. So no one is really in a lot of people aren't really in a financial place to say, yes, I'll give you the money back. So I try to sway my clients as much as possible away from canceling because if you are that couple, if you are planning a wedding in the near future, when we're facing these times, it's very unlikely that you'll get money back. And also, most vendors are protected because I think there was like a rumor going around that force majeure was a possibility, and that doesn't protect necessarily. Not I can't provide legal advice or
Mm-hmm.
counsel, but it doesn't protect you. And then you're like, and then that goes down a whole other rabbit hole of like, then you have to take them to small claims court, and that just taints the experience and the wedding. And it just going down that route is not something I would ever recommend to any of my clients to fully cancel. Maybe if it's really important that you get married on your wedding date, but maybe not have everyone there, I think that's okay if the bans are lifted. If the bans are not lifted, though, I can in good conscience say that having an at-home wedding or having a wedding period that would require like an officiant to step into your household or would require that you go to the county clerk's office if it's open, I can't in good conscience say that it's okay to do that. So I would never recommend that. But once the bans are lifted, then yes, I 100%, call the officiant, go to the county clerk's office, get your marriage license, all those things. But yeah, I'm helping my couples through figuring out how to definitely don't cancel and then postpone. And if we postpone, we pick a date normally in the fall. And then if the fall doesn't happen, we're always in negotiations with our vendors to figure out what would happen if we needed to postpone again and how that would look.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you don't want, as a couple, you don't want to put this bad taste in around the wedding and something that's so supposed to be so happy and joyful to you needed to go to the courthouse to deal with vendors, to put some ugliness into it. Like you don't want to deal with that when it's about wedding and you should be happy, And so what have you noticed from your couples, like emotionally and mentally? What are they struggling the most? Are they sad, angry, stressful, frustrated? I bet all of those, but
it's like 1% is very emotional, but for the most part, people are like in my conversations when we have our meetings, I think keeping the eye on the prize. Like I'm getting married, I'm marrying my best friend. This is the dream vision I had for my wedding. Let's try to get as close to that as possible, right? Like I think continuing the conversations, continuing to plan is the best thing that you can do for yourself emotionally. And then on the other side, the ones that have had to cancel, I had two different reactions. Like the one that had to cancel, she was like, you know what, Michelle, this is devastating, but she still got to marry. So that March 14th cancellation, they still decided to have, before the bans were even put in place, they decided to still get married. So she was able to get married to her best friend. And she said it wasn't what she had expected or imagined, but she was like, I'm so grateful that I got to marry him after all. Like the world is crazy right now. And I'm very just thankful that that was able to happen. But then for my June bride, that won't even be able to get married in the court house because they're not even open. So for her, it's a little bit harder and it's a lot more emotional. We are probably on the phone talking an hour every single day, just about updates and what's going on. And sometimes she's crying. Sometimes we're both crying. It's all kinds of emotional type of conversations, but it's not, I think it's okay to grieve. And I think people should, if push comes to shove and you can't do it or you can't reschedule and you have to cancel or, emotionally you just can't handle planning another wedding for another date, then yeah, I think it's okay to be sad about your wedding. And the other thing I'm seeing is that there are a lot of people involved around you, like maybe sisters or brothers or parents that aren't helping the situation. They might be negative Nancy's, and instead of finding like creative solutions, like, you know what, let's just have a party on your wedding day via Zoom, or let's, I don't know, have like a virtual DJ like a dance, I don't know, whatever kind of things that they're coming up with, or maybe even sending them food via like DoorDash. Like instead of coming up with creative solutions like that, you might have negative people giving you like feedback of like, well, I don't understand why we're not getting married, or you know what, like, why don't you postpone, or why are you canceling? I'm going to return my dress, like from the bridesmaids. Like there's some dramatic stuff that's happening, and I think you need to shut that down right away. Like as soon as you start hearing that kind of thing, you just stay focused on yourself and the people that are being positive around you, because in general, we are all like not just from a wedding standpoint, but we're all facing so many challenges and struggles right now that if we were to focus on the negative, we would all, be in this dark place. And so regardless of whether you're planning a wedding or not, like trying to stay positive, and it's okay to be sad. It's okay to grieve and then get out of it and find out what the solution would be moving forward. Does that answer your question? I don't even know got there.
Yes, it
Okay.
does. It does very good. I can just see all the emotions that brides would have and grooms. You know,
Yeah.
especially intercultural couples who would have families and friends from another country who's maybe got hit harder or somebody got sick or they just can't travel. I remember, for example, when they closed the borders to Europe, to and from Europe and between America and Europe. And I just got so stressed because my family is in Europe. And now, even if I would want to or have to go, I can't. And just that thought is just that stressing me out. Not that thankfully, I don't have to go, but it's just, yeah, I can imagine just additional things, that
Right.
multicultural couples would have.
Well, I know it's hard for me. My family lives like an hour away, and I'm
Hmm.
like, this is so sad I can't see you. So
But
I can't
yeah,
imagine.
then there are some families who live so close to each other and they can't see each other either. So it doesn't really matter, I guess.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
who would you, if there's a couple who can't decide if they should postpone the wedding or just get married in their homes and move on with their life. And one example that I was talking with a couple that they mentioned that the reason they got married in their house because they just otherwise they wouldn't have been able to live together. They were living
Mhm.
separately, so in order for them to move in together, they wanted to get married, and that was something they didn't want. That's why they didn't want to postpone the wedding. So I thought that's a very strong point and reason to do that. But what other things you saw or think that which couples? I know then there's another issue that courthouse is closed. So even if they would want to get married in their homes, they can't because it's just impossible to like sign papers. Like should they just get married and then sign the papers later? Like as a wedding planner, what would you suggest?
Yeah. That one's hard
I
because, like
know.
you said, the courthouse is not open. So legally they can't live together. But there's also the spiritual aspect of it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there's also the ceremonial piece of it. So, like, for example, signing a ketubah, like culturally
Mm-hmm.
in for Jewish communities, that's legally binding. Not here in the United States, but it's something if you wanted to do like a Zoom call with someone who's performing, Jewish ceremonies still, you can still do that if you absolutely want to from a cultural standpoint. But legally, like there's just nothing that can be done. I mean, I heard that there's a website online
Mm-hmm.
that is still granting I don't know the name of it, but I just heard through, my planning communities that there is
Mm-hmm.
a website online that's still performing marriages. I'm not sure how, and that's why I don't feel comfortable
Yeah.
recommending it. But if you do some Googling and if you
Mm-hmm.
trust it and, if you're that desperate and you need to get married right away, then there might be options out there. I just don't know I don't know exactly how legitimate the
Yeah.
source is. So
And it
just doing
might
some
be
research.
different in different countries. Some listeners that are listening not from America, there might be some government or some kind of law or rule that comes out, and then you can do that online. That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I mean, I know that you can apply for marriage license online. It's just you have to physically go and say, yes, I approve that I'm getting married by my own will. So I know that that needs to happen. But with the way things are changing, it's possible that it can be done online. Who knows?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree. Can you think of any other example why would somebody go with that instead of postponing?
Hmm.
For example, I know some couples are worried that if everybody postpones it to fall and winter or next summer, that there's just going to be so many weddings that all the vendors going to be booked. There's just not going to be any dates left for them if all this year gets pushed to next year.
I mean, that's true. I will say that 2021 is already just starting
Yeah.
to look very, very busy. So that's why I'm saying I 100% recommend that you continue being excited about your wedding, that you continue planning the wedding, and pick a day. If I'm working with a couple, like right now I'm getting inquiries for 2021, and I feel safe
Mm-hmm.
committing to summer weddings. Like I feel safe that in the summer, even if it took a year for the vaccine to be made, which is what the estimated time is, then I think the summer of next year sounds pretty safe to plan a
Mm-hmm.
wedding. So I would continue moving forward because that's true. I think vendors are going to be booked up, but also if it's so special for you and very important for you to get married this year,
Mm-hmm.
consider a weekday wedding. Like if that's something
Yeah.
that is possible for your family, I will 100% support doing a weekday wedding because it's very unlikely that your vendor is booked during the week, especially like, on a Monday or something like which I'm doing next year, even before coronavirus happened. We're planning a wedding on a Monday. And I think that's totally okay because for weddings, people are excited. They want to celebrate with you. Like getting an invitation in the mail to a wedding is like, I don't know, for me at least, it's so like I'm surprised and I'm excited and I'm Googling like what am I gonna wear? Like I would love to, that's exciting for me. And I think most people, especially if we've been caged up, for 6 months or however long it
Yeah.
is, we are gonna want to party and we're gonna want to party hard. And it would be so good to be able to get that invitation regardless of when that day is and then plan your wedding accordingly. If it's very important that your wedding be this year, before 2021.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Would you recommend planning? Like I'm thinking about guest counts. So let's say they open up the courthouse, you're allowed to have smaller parties. And like you said, that's probably going to be first 5 people, then 15, 50, just like they were doing going backwards, you know?
Yeah.
So do you suggest your couples to plan on with the smaller number initially and then how does that work? How would they decide of who to invite? And is it safe to invite 100 people or should they go with 50?
Yeah. I have to caution that like things are changing all the time. Like yesterday, the mayor here in California said, I mean, in LA said, come June, July, and August, we can probably expect the bans to be lifted, but gatherings probably won't happen in the masses. Like we might
Mm-hmm.
have smaller gatherings, and that could change because if things get worse for whatever reason, then that could be pushed back later. But um, to answer your question, I think that it depends on the couple and what's important to them. Like I know for one of my couples, it's very, very important that their grandparents are present,
Mm-hmm.
um, that they experienced their wedding because they were a big part of their upbringing and their life. And so for them, they were okay pushing it to 2021 in the summer, like, because that's how important it was to have the family there. And for other people, it might not be that important. It might be just important to have your closest, 5 to 10 family members. And in that case, yeah, I mean, planning an at-home wedding or continuing your wedding if you don't have, budget minimums at your venues, like all considering all the facts, yeah, I think it's good to start off with a smaller number, but we won't know what those numbers are until we get directions from, the authorities that, we can have 20 to 25 people. But then even then, like thinking from a planning perspective, we have to think of how the environment's going to change at weddings and how it's important to continue to keep safe because we're still not in the green. So like
Mm-hmm.
having the staff in masks and gloves, like making sure that's all happening and making sure you're doing plated meals to minimize contact and making sure that people are separated. Like if they're not in the same household, keeping people separated on the table. So that might mean ordering more tables and keeping, chairs as far apart, like keeping people in clusters or, like for ceremonies, for example, I can see it now where we're going to have gaps for ceremonies spaces and moving forward when I'm finding venues for my clients that are having their wedding in 2021, we need to think about the space and it needs to be a little bit bigger so we can allow social distancing. Even if that's not a problem in a year from now, I still want to be prepared for it. And things like maybe even like dancing and dance floors, that might not be, for some cultures that's not even an issue to begin with, so that's okay, but for some cultures it is. And then just having a big enough space to where people can dance and hang out but
Mhm.
not be so close to each other. I think these are new things that we're going to have to start thinking about, and having sanitizing stations, masks available, all kinds of things that will keep people protected, especially right now. Because I don't even, like, say in August we're ready to move forward with having events for like 50 people or less, we're going to have to be thinking about these things and implementing. It might even require a whole new vendor to come in and do like sanitizing, like having lines
Mhm.
that say stay back here, and like if there's lines for the bathroom, stay back here. If there's a line for the bar, keeping those distance like you see at the grocery stores. Well, we might need to implement those kinds of restrictions moving forward.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
would, yeah, I
Go
would
ahead.
proceed with, I would for sure continue the planning, be excited, because
Yeah.
there's like, you still get to marry your best friend, but keep in, like, just always follow the rules and keep in line with the news, keep up with the news, and then plan from there.
Okay. These are all so great. I didn't even think about, implementing all these distance restrictions. These are all great. Thank you. I love all
Well,
of
you
this, what you
too.
just
I mean,
shared.
I'm sure you as a photographer, you're gonna want to be
Yeah.
protected as well, and make sure. I don't know. You might have to have those precautions of like wearing a mask and wearing gloves, and to protect yourself and your family when you go home. So those are all
Hmm.
things that we need to think about moving
Yeah,
forward.
exactly. Let's circle back to the in-house weddings because I don't know if you were thinking if you have any wedding. I guess they don't really would require a wedding planner to plan an in-house wedding, but I have seen some people asking questions like mostly in like Facebook groups. Do you guys have any cute ideas of how we can make this day special? I don't know. Do you have any ideas or tips? Because you gave me already so many good ones. Just some cute ideas for couples, especially if we're trying to think about multicultural couples who maybe have some language barriers with their family members. They want to do some live streaming, but then they have family members from different countries or different traditions. You have any cute ideas for
Yeah.
them?
Yeah, well, the wedding that canceled, that ended up having their wedding at home. So once bans, are lifted, and you decide to have a wedding at your home,
Mm-hmm.
I think it was, so we what we ended up doing is I talked to the photographer, I talked to the floral designer, and I talked to a few other vendors that I thought would be key for the wedding day. And we actually came up with a plan to, so they picked their parents' house because it was a larger home than what they have. And what we did is she gave us a tour of the house, and between the florist and myself, we picked she did like a video tour, and we
Mm-hmm.
picked a spot where it would be best because they had white carpet. So we were like, and there's this beautiful window there, and I was like, it's probably not a good idea because it was raining too at the time. So then what we did is we found a spot right underneath the staircase, and the florist went in and took all the flowers that she was supposed to have for the wedding. She ended up creating a huge like in-house live green wall
Oh.
for the couple, so that, and where their ceremony would take place. And then they just got chairs from the dining table, and they set that all up. And even if they would have brought a rental company in, I mean, I think it was only like 18 people that were there, so it wasn't necessary. But if you're having something a little bit bigger, like bringing in a rental company to make sure, because I think what makes a wedding really special is when, aside from the ceremony, is when you're thinking about your guests and you're thinking about like what do they need, and how can you make them feel hosted, because you are hosting an
Mm-hmm.
event for them. And how can they feel comfortable, and especially at a home, like it's your home, so it's your heart. And bringing them into your home so they know where the bathroom is, and they know they have a place to sit down, and maybe there's a hand sanitizing station, like those kinds of things. So they did do that. So I thought that was really beautiful because the florist completely transformed the space. She's an artist, so that was really fun for her. And then bringing in the photographer, but he was keeping his distance at the time as well. He wasn't like all up in the face, which I think ended up making for beautiful photos because it wasn't like superposed, and it was actually
Mm-hmm.
really beautiful. And he was able to get like kind of shots from far away. And then they had catering brought in, but it was just like drop off the food because the more people involved, the more,
The
I don't know,
risk is
risk there
higher.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So they had them drop off food, and they were actually, it was a Korean wedding, so they actually had Korean food brought in, and they actually had a translator, a family member who's a translator that was able to translate the ceremony for everybody that didn't speak English, because what they had a friend officiate the wedding, which I thought was really special because that also adds to the uniqueness of having it at your home, is having a friend who knows you to be able to talk to you, to the people that don't know you that well, to be able to talk to your guests and say, bring
Mm-hmm.
in stories or bring in like events that happened, and be able to share that with them, because the more they know about you, the better they can connect with you. And especially if they're, coming from out of the country and they're not super familiar with your life, they want to know more, and they're like, oh, I didn't know that they did that, or that I didn't know that's how they met. So making the ceremony very personalized and custom that way is very special for the ceremony. And then in terms of I think I talked about the translator already. So
Mm-hmm.
that's very important because especially if you're doing a cross-cultural piece where you might have like an Indian and Jewish wedding, and something like that, you'll want to have a translator that's helping everybody connect, and not
Yeah.
just, because it feels isolating when you don't know what you're like, I don't understand what that
Mm-hmm.
is. It's very isolating. So being able to bring someone in that can do that. Normally it's a family member, or you can have a professional do it. And then the live streaming, I think, was a great point, because I think we had thought about that for the cancellation on March 14th. We were like, okay, well, we're not going to invite, because before it turned into we're going to cancel, it was like, well, maybe the older folks don't come, and we'll just live stream the wedding. So
Mm-hmm.
that's very important as well, as to do that. And then yeah, I mean, obviously dancing probably can't take place so much in a house, or maybe it can. I don't know. I don't know what we're going to be expecting once the bans are lifted, but I think focusing on the ceremony at a home would be the best, and then having it be a sacred space. So when you do bring in your ceremonial pieces, like maybe you're going to do a mandap, so you're going to probably have to do it outside. If you don't have space for that in your home, then you'll want to bring somebody in, like a rental company, in the morning to get that all figured out. And as long as you make it unique to you and special to you, I think focusing the attention there is what's going to help people feel like, okay, yes, I love this. I'm glad I did this.
Yeah. And how special is that when, years later you have this memory of I got married here at my, even if it's not their own home, at my parents' house, or and in this
Yeah.
corner, and how special when every time when they go over after this, they will remember their wedding, that it's happened there. So that's just kind of gives that extra, you know,
Yeah.
romantic feel
Yeah.
to it. So I don't know if this specific couple that you mentioned, if they're planning to have a another celebration after all of this is over, since it seems like they did a pretty good job of having a pretty decent wedding. But I heard that most couples who would just have a little wedding, or I would say, I wouldn't even say a wedding, I would just say who get married in their homes and they want to have their wedding later. What would your advice be for them? And is that even a good idea? Is that necessary? I'm sure, again, it depends. But any tips for couples to help them decide if they should they even deal with having a proper wedding, or this was enough to just get married in a house?
That's a good question. I know for my couple that canceled on March 14th, that still got married but canceled their wedding celebration, it is in their plans to throw a big party later, because while the ceremony, they're so grateful that they got to get married, because a lot of couples can't. So they're very excited, but they were also really excited to finally see their college friends that they haven't seen in a while, friends that lived in other countries. Like, they were excited to get everybody together and have fun and like break bread and drink and dance, if that's what they, like, they were really excited for that part. And they didn't get to do that. So for sure, they're planning on it. I'm working with another client right now that we're thinking of doing a social distancing wedding. So once
Mm-hmm.
the bans are lifted, we're planning on renting out a huge like lot, like a parking lot almost, and then setting up a small ceremony, and then having like little circles placed around that tell people to like stay in pockets of like 6 feet apart. So we are planning on doing something creative like that. And then even for couples that don't know if they should be doing that, that's totally up to you. Like if for you it was just about the ceremony and you were excited to get married, just to be married to your best friend, then that's enough. Then maybe you can have a small dinner for your closest friends. But I know a lot of extroverts that they want to have this big party for their friends. They want to host them, and they want to show them like, hey guys, this is our life now. This is our family. Like meet so and so. And that was important for them because especially like my couples are very excited that they're fusing these cultures together, and they want
Mm-hmm.
one side to know the other side. And it's
Mm-hmm.
and honestly for me that's very important because it shows respect and reverence for each other. If you don't know someone, how are you going to love them or welcome
Mm-hmm.
them into your home, or like it's hard to accept someone that way. But if you get to know someone and if you introduce them, then it just becomes a little bit easier down the line. So for some people that's very important. And at least I am a modern wedding planner, so at least for my couples it's very important to have that party and that celebration after this is all over, even if they do end up having a small ceremony right now.
Mm-hmm. I
Yeah,
have
but
a,
it's
I
just
yeah.
yeah.
That's a good point. Those are all good reasons. I have a practical question for you. What would you recommend couples to how to notify their guests if their wedding got
Mm.
postponed? So let's say some couples probably just send out their save the dates. Some couples already sent out their invitation that has a date on it that's no longer accurate. So should they send out a new invitation or call everybody, or what should they do?
I would highly recommend calling everyone personally, just because I'm sure some people got have gotten, gifts, or if they've gotten ready, or if they've
Mhm.
made travel plans. So calling them, I think, would be the best, and making sure that everybody answers. And if they don't, like make a list,
Yeah.
of who you've called and who you've contacted, especially if you have a big list. Um, I would definitely recommend calling them first. And also, I think it's just more heartfelt because I think everyone's struggling,
Yeah.
and just having that human contact for a minute would be nice. It's obviously not a easy conversation, but definitely calling them first. And then what we've been doing is using the same branding that we used for their wedding invitations. We're creating another invitation that says like one postponed. So we're like save the new date, or
Mhm.
whatever the case is, and we're sending those out so that they know the new date for 2021, or whatever it is. And then for those postponing, we're not putting a date. We're just letting them know, like, thank you for your support so far. Due to the situation, we've decided to postpone, and we'll let you know when we have the new date. And then we also update their wedding websites if they have one, to let them know that we're to refer to the website, because that's where we're going to be updating information. And also sending an email too if you have those. That's not a bad idea either.
Hmm. I love those, especially those who don't answer their phones. Maybe just send them an email.
Yeah. But then
Yeah.
there's just some people who don't ever check their emails. That's why a phone call is good, just to make sure they
Yeah. And it's a good point
get
that
it.
you
Yeah.
want to ask how they're doing, how it's affecting them and all that. Yeah. What would you tell the couples who are worried that if they get married in their home and then they want to have a celebration that people just won't come because they would say, well, you already got married, or, you know, guests would just not want to come because they don't take it too seriously.
Oh. I I don't know. I can't see that happening.
Okay.
And like I said earlier, we are going to be so excited to see our families
Oh
and
yeah, that's a
friends.
good point.
I can't see them not being excited, but I will say that like even though you might legally get married on, the original date, or maybe you might even ceremonially do it,
Hmm.
there's nothing wrong with now doing it again and like professing your vow, because I think part of the wedding is telling your family and friends, like, this is the person I have vowed my life to, this is the person who I will make sacrifices for, will have fun with, like this is that person, and I want you all to know who this person is. And I think part of that is sharing that with your family and friends. And so if it's possible and you have the emotional capacity for it, I would say redo the ceremony again on the new day, and have the reception and the celebration and all the things that go with it. And I can't I can't see someone being like, "Oh, it's not that important." Like I think people are. I will say that for weddings, like maybe not birthdays and maybe not like anniversaries, but I will say for weddings, I see people do crazy things to make it work, to ask time off from work, to take 5 connection flights, to, people move mountains to attend weddings for their friends and family, especially if they're close or they haven't seen each other for a while. People will go that extra mile, and I can't see why they wouldn't. It's bizarre to me why they wouldn't want to
Hmm.
celebrate. And maybe there are some, but if you invite 100, maybe like 10
Yeah.
of them won't be able to
Yeah.
make it, and that's even normal for people who haven't been through COVID and had a
Yeah.
wedding already. Yeah.
Yeah, because especially with intercultural couples, is how, for example, I got married in the courthouse because we needed the papers quickly and we didn't have time to plan a wedding or anything like that. But some couple, and we unfortunately we didn't have another like a proper wedding after that, although we wanted, but we never ended up never having one. But I know that a lot of couples who have to get married fast for paper reasons or visa, green card, then they also have another wedding, or they want to get married in another country and they plan another wedding
Yeah.
for their family members. So I think in our little multicultural circle, that might be a most common thing to do, to plan another wedding, to have two celebrations. So yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually really normal. Like I worked with a couple. She was Chinese and I think he was Korean, and they went and had a wedding. They had their wedding in the US, and they each had their weddings in their own countries.
Oh wow.
And
Yeah.
then same thing with an Indian and Jewish wedding. They had their wedding out here, but then they went to India the following, like 6 months later, they went to India and had their Indian wedding for the family in India. So,
Hmm.
I mean, it's for sure in our culture, I mean, in our industry, it's not uncommon
Yeah.
to begin with. So, yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. That's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah. So one more question. I know we're kind of
Yeah.
getting longer, but I enjoy all of this.
I know, me too. Good
Yeah.
question.
So if let's say that a couple decides that they are not sure about choosing another date, but they do want to have a proper normal wedding. They don't want to compromise with anything. They would rather just postpone it as long as they have to. Um, how can they move forward with the wedding planning without having a specific date? So, what are some of the things that they can do, still with the planning, for example, buying a dress, or I don't know, what else can they do to still move forward with the planning without having the date? Is that even something that
So,
you would recommend to do?
it's going to be really, I think planners might be the only ones who will contract without a wedding date, as far
Mm-hmm.
as I know. Like, I know most people, they need to know, because if, like, rentals, for example, they need to know that they have the inventory for the day, so they can't necessarily commit to someone without a date.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be hard to do that. So if possible, I would pick a date in the future and preliminarily use that date to get contracts moving forward, and
Mm-hmm.
then make sure that, because this is what I'm recommending for my clients, is when you're contracting with someone, ask the vendor, like, what are your cancellation like now everyone's changing their
Yeah.
cancellation policies and updating their contracts. So I would sit down with them and say, how, like, what does that look like? What happens if, like, I plan it in the fall and we still can't have the wedding in the fall? Like, what are the fees? Are there fees? Like, what other dates can we work on? Do you have associate shooters? Like, whatever the case is, really outline the plan. And if it's something you're comfortable with, then that's someone that you want to work with. But if it makes you uncomfortable, then that's a red flag, and that that's not going to be a good fit, because every personality is different. Some couples are very laid back and they're like, you know what, like, that's fine, whatever works for you works for us. But for other couples, they're like, I need to know the A to the Z, like what's going to happen. And so moving forward, especially if you don't have a date, or if you have a date that doesn't really that might not work, then you'll want to have negotiations with your vendors moving forward, especially the venue and food and beverage, which are big chunks of money that you're spending. It's typically like 45% of the budget. You want to make sure that your fees can apply for future dates if possible, or maybe it's just not a good fit for you. And in terms of like planning ahead, even without a wedding date, like you said, there are things that you can do, but for the most part, I would say that I would just continue ahead, getting your wedding dress, or ordering, or designing your invitations, but not necessarily printing them yet, or maybe putting together the planning timeline for the whole scope, and then putting your vendors in a list of like, okay, once I know that the bands are lifted and I know what date I want, these are the 3 photographers I want to talk to. And, you can still continue planning if you don't have a date, but I wouldn't wait too long, because like you said, 2021, fall 2020 and all of 2021 is going to be really crazy, because vendors are being booked and some businesses aren't going to make it through this storm. And so the landscape is going to be even slimmer than it has been in the past. And so making sure you continue ahead is a good idea. And then if you don't want to, at least have a list ready to go, so that when you know the date, you're like, okay, boom, 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 I know who I want to work with. Let me call them, see if they're available, that kind of thing.
Yep. Moves everything faster than if you have a vision. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we're just going to wrap up with the last question. If you have any final advice to couples, something we forgot to mention, do you have maybe some resources, some website, or some, I don't know, planner or something that couples can use during this time? And just any final advice.
My biggest advice is just to stay positive, and I know that it seems so crazy right now, but honestly, we're like, not much has changed for us except for like our most recent weddings that obviously we're in the thick of it. But be excited and be happy, and know that like the world is going to continue. It's just, we don't know exactly when, but it's not going to, like, even if we think about a year from now, which is what a normal planning timeline is for most couples. I know for visa reasons and maybe even cultural reasons, like fast wedding planning happens, but that's even better for you, because then you can plan in like 2 months for a wedding, right? So I would just say, just stay super positive, and as soon as you hear the negative comments, try to get that out of, try to cut that off, and just be excited. And then in terms of resources, I would just say I do blog quite a bit right now, especially it's all about Corona stuff, because that's just what everything is right now. And like, I'm planning on releasing a blog on like, now, like once this is all over, what things to think about, like the list of stuff we were talking about. I'm putting together a plan on how to help couples plan and think about the things that they probably wouldn't think about, because they don't do this all the time. So I would just say my website, www.michelleisabel.com, and then if you go to my blog, I have a few resources on there that you can look through, and then I even have an opt-in that if depending on where you are in the planning phases, it might help you out. So I would just say my website is a good spot.
Perfect. I'll just put all that link in the show notes so they can find it.
Okay.
Thank you so
Yeah, and I
much,
can send it to
Michelle.
you too.
Yes. Okay, yes. And then you have an Instagram also. Do you want to share that maybe?
Yeah, my Instagram is at Michelle Isabel underscore. So it's MICHELLEISABEL
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much for being here, Michelle. This was
Thank
seriously
you.
so many great advice. Especially my favorite one is that how you are thinking of what's going to happen after the pandemic is over and how our um, events are going to change after this, how nothing is going to be the same and we still need to consider all of these cautious things. So I love that. That's really something that not many planners and not many couples think about. So I'm really excited. I can't wait to get this episode out.
Oh, I'm excited. Well, thank you so much for having me. This was awesome, and you made me feel comfortable because obviously these things are never easy. So
I know.
thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here.